What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. In today's video, I want to talk about player progression and regression within franchise mode in MLB The Show 23. Specifically, I want to talk about the month-to-month progression that you're going to see with your players, especially in your farm system, and whether or not to be concerned with what you're seeing out of those players. I recently had somebody comment asking whether or not they should be concerned about the negatives they see within their top-ranked players in their farm system, and that is something that I think is definitely worth exploring. This is already a franchise that is months in, we're past the draft and everything, so keep that in mind. But I wanted to point out a couple of prospects here, what's going on with them, and one in particular is Spencer Torkelson. This is a player that is a 65 overall, A potential, 23 years old, so all things considered, especially when you look at his individual ratings, he's going to be a pretty solid ball player, especially if you stick with this guy and continue to develop him. When you also take a look at his production through the season so far, in 304 at-bats, he has 30 runs, 7 home runs, 37 RBIs, a handful of steals, and a 286 batting average, which is pretty dang good for the minor leagues, for AAA especially. He does have a small injury right now, but there's nothing particularly negative going on with his play. But whenever you bring up this player's player card, you will see he's getting a bunch of positives in various different areas, but he's also getting -4 to his base running aggression. Now, this is worth considering for a couple of reasons, because this commenter was specifically asking, when you see a bunch of negatives, even if it's a well-performing minor league player, should you be looking to move on from that guy? Should you be looking to trade him? Should you be looking to replace him with somebody else? Should you be looking to move him around in your farm system? And the answer simply is no. The real reason that these ratings go up and down is pretty much randomized, and from everything I can tell doing research on the subject, it is fairly randomized. You could have a player that is doing really well stealing bases, and their stealing could go down, their base running could go down. As Spencer Torkelson is my example, this is a guy with a handful of stolen bases. There's really no reason, unless he's getting caught stealing a bunch of times, that he should be going down significantly with his stolen bases. A 625 stolen base percentage, at least from my knowledge, really isn't that bad. It's not the best in the world, but not enough that he should have a 0 stealing and -4 to his base running aggression. So that's something worth considering. And in addition to that, again, as you go through, you're going to see players just randomly start to have their stats go up and down. They're going to get better in certain areas, especially if you are training them in specific areas, which is a tool that you can utilize, which is under your management tab. You can train the players specifically. So when we take a look at Spencer Torkelson, he's being trained in batting cages. So you're probably not going to see many negatives coming from his contact right and contact left, which if you look at the top left-hand corner of the screen, you can see those are the two stats that are focused on, that are being highlighted blue, that are being focused on from that training specifically. So you're probably going to see positives in that area. You may start to see negatives in other areas. Now, those negatives and positives aren't 100% random. In my experience, they do align sometimes in some ways with a player's actual performance. So Casey Mize here, for example, in the minor leagues, is getting -1 to his stamina. Well, that could be due to his inability to go longer into games, to go 7 innings or 8 innings, or try to pull out a full game. And that can be a correlation as to what's going on with those ratings. And so the thing that I see the most actually within the minor league system, and I'm not seeing here out of these specific players, is a player doing really well batting on one side and the negatives coming on the other side of the plate. So oftentimes you'll see a guy like Torkelson have positives in his contact versus left, his power versus left, and then you'll see negatives in his contact right and power right. But that's, again, not exactly what's going on here. But again, that does sometimes stem from the player's performance at the plate. Oftentimes, however, just like with your major league team, you will see players getting positives in one category and negatives in another. Here's another good example for you. In my major league system, Javier Baez, the shortstop for the Tigers, is getting negative to his contact versus left and negative speed, but he's getting positives in other categories. Generally speaking, what's going to happen is it's going to strive to increase the player's overall up to that player's development potential. So if we take a look at Torkelson, for example, over at first base again, he's going to have a specific attribute number related to his potential, which is 96. And the system is going to, over time, if he plays well enough, try to drive him up to a 96 overall. And that is going to take into account what is actually mattering at the position that he's listed at. So as a first baseman, what's most important to him is not going to be his base running aggression, his stealing, his speed, and those types of things, not even his defense either. It's going to try to drive up his batting stats, which again is what you're seeing as the primary progression with this player. You're seeing most of his progression coming at the plate between his contact, his power, his discipline, his vision, all of those statistics which matter most for a first baseman. Now again, he's probably getting a little bit of a bonus to his contact because that's what we're specifically training, but nonetheless, you're going to see positives in the areas that matter for that specific position, and you'll oftentimes see negatives in other categories as well. The game is not going to try to balance out every single player. That's something that you have to come to terms with, that as you go month to month and progression hits and regression hits month to month, your A and B potential guys are probably going to go up, or they're going to stay relatively the same if they're not progressing, and they might get negatives in some categories that you're not liking those negatives to come from. That is going to happen. Much like I showed you with Casey Mize, for example, he is getting negatives to his stamina, and I wouldn't want him to get negatives to his stamina because when he gets to the MLB, I want to use him for longer innings. I want to get more out of him. So it's unfortunate that he's getting a negative there, but ultimately his overall is still going up. If you take a look at the middle of the screen, as a 75 overall, that's giving me the arrows up, and that means that his overall has already gone up, and you can see that by all of the other positives that he has gotten on his player card. So just because a player is getting negatives does not mean that you need to move on from them or that something is going wrong. Oftentimes, like I said, it's really just a matter of the system trying to get that player to a specific overall. It's not always 100% tied to the player's performance, especially with specific statistics and ratings. Oftentimes it is somewhat random whether ratings are going to go up or down, but you do want to keep in mind that just because a player is getting some negatives doesn't mean that that's a player you need to be moving on from. Another great example, Matt Manning, -1 to stamina, -1 to his home runs per 9, even though he's playing pretty well as a 76 overall pitcher. A 4.53 ERA is not terrible, and again, he's still going up in terms of his overall. This is something that you just need to become familiar with and content with because it's the way the game is going to operate. It's not always going to make 100% sense, and at times it actually does make sense that a player will get better in some categories and other categories will lag behind. I'm very familiar with that in the Pittsburgh Pirates franchise, where you'll see a lot of my prospects that have A and B potential still getting negative ratings in specific categories. Travis Swaggerty is now up to a 70 overall, which is a pretty good jump for him, but he's still getting some major negatives at the plate. Likewise, I could probably go into any one of these players and they're probably going to be getting a couple of negatives here and there in comparison to all of the positives that they're getting at that position. And as I go through some of these players, you'll notice that some of the ratings that are getting negatives are actually more common than others. So when we talk about starting pitchers, for example, especially in the minor league system, more often than not, you're going to see negatives to their stamina. It's just kind of a natural way that the game likes to take down certain ratings. So a lot of players are getting that -1 to their stamina, and it's not necessarily for any particular reason. Sometimes I feel like it is indeed tied to a player's performance, but like I said, it feels generally, in my experience, more random than it is actually an increase or decrease based off a player's specific performance in any given month. And that's, again, a reason why you're going to want to kind of just bear with the system, because it is going to be randomized a little bit. You never know how your player is going to progress exactly. It's not really like Madden or other sports titles where you can kind of focus in on certain ratings. You can try to develop your player up in a specific way. You can train them a little bit within MLB The Show, but nonetheless, the players are going to progress relatively within the ratings that matter the most for their specific position, and it's going to be somewhat randomized. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this discussion topic today. If you did, leave a like down below, comment, and subscribe. As always, I'll see you in the next video, and I hope you guys have a good one.